Let love surround you and keep you safe and warm. May the music in our hearts be a shelter from the storm.
Welcome to Salinity Presents, a podcast where I, Emily Wilder, interview the vendors and friends of Salinity Seafood and More, my business on Whidbey Island in Washington State. I'm here today with author and journalist Rowan Jacobsen. This is part 2 of a 2-part interview. Find part 1 anywhere you find podcasts. Speaking of crazy flavors, you then wrote a book called Truffle Hound, which got a lot of people thinking about something that they'd probably never thought about. Truffles, and not chocolate truffles, which we'll talk about in a minute. But tell us about truffles. What are they, if somebody's not familiar with them, and where are they found these days?
Yeah, part of the reason I wrote the book was because so many people are not familiar with them, or they have the sense that they're this super snooty food that you can only get in Italy or something.
Yeah, shaved by the gram over some fancy pasta.
Yeah, literally. That's what they'll do in Italy in the fall. They'll bring a scale to your table with this truffle, and they'll weigh the truffle beforehand, then they'll shave it over your pasta, and then they'll weigh it again and charge you for the difference in grams. It can be $100 that they've just shaved over the top of your dish. It's just stupid money, but it's all built into what the truffle is and why it's so hard to find. Truffles are very closely related to mushrooms. They're the fruiting body of a fungus, just like a mushroom is. And that fungus lives in the soil in a symbiotic relationship with trees. And it's all these microscopic threads. That's the life form itself. It's hard to even see it in the soil. But when it wants to reproduce, it makes this fruiting body, which is full of spores. If it's a mushroom, it pops above the surface and opens up its little parasol, and the spores just come out in the wind. But a truffle, it's like a different strategy where it doesn't pop up. Basically a mushroom that never opens and always stays underground. They probably evolved in places where it was too dry or where it was too risky to pop up and be a mushroom. You might get dehydrated. For whatever reason, they decided to stay underground. But if you're a little ball of spores and you're underground, how do you spread the spores around, which is the whole point? You can't do it. You can't rely on the wind like other mushrooms do. The trick that truffles brilliantly figured out is to make themselves smell so intense and so irresistible that all these forest animals will be able to detect them from far away, even though they're underground, and come and lose their minds, basically, and race over and dig up the truffle and eat the truffle, and then poop out the spores somewhere else later on. That's how the truffles get moved around everywhere. But in order for that to work, they have to smell super intense, and they do. And so people respond to those smells as well as pigs and squirrels and everybody else. What's happened in Europe is that hunting those truffles has become a big deal. And our noses are not good enough to detect them when they're a foot underground and scattered throughout this forest. But pigs can do it, and pigs were the original partners that people teamed up with to find truffles. But pigs never worked that well in a sense because the pigs want to eat the truffles. And if it's a big pig, you can't stop the pig from eating the truffle. Everyone talks about like old truffle hunters who only have 9 fingers or whatever. So everybody has switched to dogs. Dogs are really good at it. They love to do it, so they learn pretty quickly. They have great noses. They're very good about communicating with the owners. Most of them don't care about the truffle. They'd rather have the biscuit at the end. Some of them do like to eat the truffles. Either way, it's a lot easier with a dog. You can fit the dog in your car a lot better than the pig. It just works way better. So that's what happens everywhere in Europe that there are truffles, which is most places in Europe. In the fall and winter, when it's truffle season, summer too for a different type of truffle, people and their dogs slip away into the woods, and you're basically just following your dog through the woods until the dog spots a truffle, and then the dog digs up the truffle and you give the dog a treat. But they're hard to find. So you have to have a really good dog, and a really good truffle dog goes for thousands of dollars, and you have to know where to go. Everybody guards their spots very carefully, just like with mushroom hunters. And they don't want to be seen. They'll sneak into the woods. They'll go at night. A lot of truffle hunting happens at night, especially in Italy and France. And it's all this underground economy. The truffles are worth a lot of money, like hundreds of dollars for a good truffle, or even thousands for a big one. And it's all just sold to dealers exactly like drugs. The truffle market is just a version of the drug market. And sometimes it's the same people, actually. It finds its way into restaurants, like fancy restaurants in Italy. Italy has the big truffle festival. But increasingly, the truffles are coming from Eastern Europe because Italy has destroyed a lot of its forests. And you need forests for truffles because they're symbiotic with trees. Most of the white truffles that Italy is famous for and that get eaten in Italy during this festival in the fall come from Croatia, Serbia, Serbia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria. That's the good zone for truffle hunting, for white truffles. Black ones come from France and Spain, and people have figured out how to farm those, so more and more of those come from farms. White truffles, no one has figured out how to cultivate them, so it's still just a wild thing. Those are the two most famous eating truffles, but truffles grow all over the world. There's thousands of species of truffles, hundreds of them are edible, and the big two European ones get all the attention. One of the things that I got into as I was working on the book was all these other truffles. And it turns out no one thinks of the US as having truffles, but the US has awesome truffles, every bit as smelly and interesting as the European truffles. The most famous of those are also from the Pacific Northwest, just like the Olympia oyster. I ended up spending a bunch of time going truffle hunting in Oregon and Washington State for the book. It's amazing to me that people don't know more about that because it's this unbelievable product, unforgettable scent once you experience it for the first time. There's a lot of them there, starting in late fall and going all the way through the winter into spring. And it's never become quite the big deal that it probably should have in the Pacific Northwest. There's a little truffle festival that attracts some people, but it should be like salmon in Alaska. It should be like a big thing that people get excited about.
Yeah, my hope is that somebody will start cultivating them on Whidbey Island, because I know you can do that. It's a little hit or miss, I've heard, as far as your success rate with that. But do you think there's enough in the wild?
There's tons in the wild. And yeah, you want to use a dog because then you're only digging up the actual spot where the truffle is. People used to do it just by raking before there were a bunch of trained dogs. If you go into the right area of Douglas fir and you just rake the soil like viciously, like down a few inches everywhere, you can find a bunch of truffles that way, but you will have also destroyed the entire mycorrhizal system in that area. So it's short-term profit, but then you basically killed the goose who laid the golden egg in a sense. So just take the golden eggs, right? But anywhere there's Doug fir of a certain age, you'll find these truffles. The hit or miss is people try to cultivate the European black truffle, and that hasn't gone very well. The environment is so different, it doesn't work very well. And it probably shouldn't. I never understood it because the Pacific Northwest has these great native truffles that are just as good and that grow really easily with Douglas fir. So they should just focus on those truffles.
So you could get a Pacific Northwest truffle, train your dog on that, and then take your dog out foraging.
Absolutely. And lots of people do. Yeah. There's a company called the Truffle Dog Company based out of Seattle.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Alana McGee. So you can get your dog trained, and any dog can do it. Any dog that's food motivated is good at it. And most dogs are food motivated. You can start even training your dog right in your yard or something with a little fake truffle that you dot it with truffle oil so it smells like a truffle. And then you hide the truffle. And when the dog finds it, the dog gets a treat and a pat on the head and enthusiasm. And yeah, it pretty much goes from there.
How would you describe the smell?
It's actually hard to describe. It does something to your brain. You can tell that these organisms have had many millions of years to figure out exactly what drives a mammal crazy. It's got almost like an alcoholic smell to it, like sherry or something, but then it's also got like an airplane glue smell to it, funky and a little rotten smelling, especially for the older ones, garlicky for sure, cheesy. It's a crazy mix of flavors. And then beyond all that, there's something that just hits your emotional system. It's not a smell that you would associate with a particular food or something. It just does something to you. I talk about the truffle face sometimes. You hold a truffle in front of somebody's nose and their eyes just get really big. They don't know if it's good or bad. They're just like, I just experienced something.
You just want to follow it wherever it goes. Just like, that's it, I'm going.
Yeah, it's got your attention.
Yeah. One of my favorite memories is you and I did a joint workshop at the Evergreen State College about truffles and oysters. And we started by serving them pizza with truffles shaved on it. And that was a remarkable experience for those students. You did a science journalism fellowship at MIT, and you've been doing a lot of research and different articles about different aspects of the brain and autoimmune diseases, and lately a lot about sunlight.
A lot of my food writing was really science and nature writing disguised as food writing. It wasn't reviews of restaurants or recipes. I mean, there are recipes, but it was never recipe focused. It was always about making the connection with the world that the food was coming out of, whether it was the nature responsible or the cultural background or just the science of it, how it all works. And I wrote a lot about health. So I often think about the nutrient side of food as well. But then at some point I got interested in light and started thinking of it as basically the other nutrient that we don't think about. Because if you think about inputs into the body, like obviously food, water, oxygen, but light's the other one. It is a constant input into the body. All those photons from the sun that are pouring down on you, a bunch of them bounce off, but a bunch of them don't. A bunch of them are absorbed by your molecules and change their behavior. And we don't think about it. We think of light as not quite real. Matter is real. Light is just this thing that we can see the matter. But light is pure energy. It's totally physical, and it totally changes the behavior of a molecule when it hits it. Once you realize that, you're like, holy cow, like this is a big input that we're just taking for granted. And the only time we tend to think about it is in terms of skin cancer. We know light is physical because it can hit your skin and increase your risk for skin cancer. And most people know that it makes vitamin D in the skin too. But those are the only two things we think of with light in terms of it actually having a physical effect on the body. But it turns out there's decades of research showing all the other things that light does to the body. And most of them are good, not all, but it's this really important part of health that we haven't put any attention into so far. And if you think about even the food we eat is all light energy in a sense. It started in plants. Plants took that energy and used it to build their bodies. And the energy is still in there, locked in their molecules that then come to us when we eat them. We're just eating light, basically. So then it's like, well, what kind of light should we be eating? Whether we're getting it through our skin or a plant, is there good light and bad light? And it turns out there is good light and bad light. There's different lights. And we need a mix of lights. Eat your colors, right? Like the rainbow of foods that we know are good for us. You want a rainbow of light too. So my new book looks at that. What do we know about what light does to us, and how can we use that to get the best of light, whether it's for mental health or physical health or alertness, energy, sleep, and where do we go wrong? Because the reality is we go wrong a lot. We spend more time indoors than any generation in history. So we actually don't get very much light at all anymore. That's a huge shift from our prehistoric past.
So it's called In Defense of Sunlight, The Surprising Science of Sun Exposure, coming out June 16th.
Time for January in Whidbey Island.
Yes, we need more sunlight here. We got bright clouds, and that's about it right now.
Bright clouds are okay, though. Actually, if you walk around with a light meter, which I do a lot these days, it can be shocking. They measure light in lux. A pure sunny day, if your light meter's pointing at the sun, it'll be like 100,000 lux that are hitting it. Clouds roll in, it's down to 10 or 20,000 lux, which is a lot less than sunny. But then you go inside your house and it's like 400 lux, 300 lux. So even a cloudy day, if you're outside, you're in 10,000 lux versus a few hundred lux inside.
Wow. I kind of want to carry around a light meter now.
You can actually download a free app for your phone. It doesn't work quite as well as the real ones, but it's close enough. It's fun.
Awesome. In preparation for this book, you spent a while without any artificial light sources. What was that like?
When you're doing the research, you start to realize there's a ton of studies about what light at night does to people. Because that's the other thing that's happening. We spend more time indoors than any generation in history, and we have more artificial light at night. It depends where you live. If you're in a city, there's a lot of light all the time. And there's now a lot of studies that show that people don't sleep as well when there's light around. And even beyond sleep, their physiology works differently if there's ambient light around at night. And it leads to bad health. I tend to wake up in the middle of the night. I'll be awake for 2 or 3 hours and then I'll fall back asleep. As I'm learning about all the bad things that light is doing to me, light at night, I started wondering, well, what would happen if I had super dark nights? Super dark. And would that cure my insomnia? Would that make me feel different in any ways? I wanted to do an experiment where I really went back to no light after sunset until morning, see what that experience would be like. And I figured I had to do it for a month to have any real takeaways. But I wanted to do it somewhere where at least after dark, it would be nice out. By the time I was ready to do it, it was March. I live in Vermont, so Vermont was not the place to do it. Yeah, Vermont's dark at night, but there's nothing you can do in March once it gets dark. I ended up renting an Airstream in southern Arizona for the month in a super, super remote corner. It's where Kitt Peak, the observatory, is. They're there because it's so dark for their telescopes. That seemed like a good area. So I rented this Airstream, and it did have solar power, but my personal rules were no light at night. So once it got dark, I just had to be in the dark until morning. I did that for a month to see what it would do to me.
What did you do? What happened?
So the first part of it, it didn't improve my sleep as much as I thought it was going to. But also, I was working normally during the day, indoors in the Airstream on my laptop. Light during the day was fine because there's tons of light during the day. You can use a laptop, it doesn't matter. And then at night, no laptop, no phone light, no light bulbs. The first couple of weeks, I still didn't sleep that well. But then I was kind of done with my work part of it. And I was also getting a little sad about all these days spent in the Airstream when I'm in this beautiful Arizona desert. So the second half, I wasn't working during the day anymore. I was just out hiking mostly, climbing mountains, cruising around. That's Arizona in March. So super bright during the days. And then I had my super dark nights. I'd hike during the day, get back to my Airstream, make a fire every night as the sun was setting, grill some food out of the campfire, watch the sunset. And then really, in a way that I had barely ever done before, every night it would be just watching the light fade and the colors change. It would take a couple hours of being out there for the sky to really go through all those stages of blue and then finally get black. And then you see the first stars and you see a bunch of stars and you see a ton of satellites. It's amazing how many satellites are out there now. But that process, that accordion process of bright, dark, then I slept great. My takeaway was that you need both. You need bright days and dark nights. And since then, I've read up about that a lot. And your cells basically need cues. Most of the cells in your body are just trying to figure out what the hell's going on out there, right? They depend on cues from the rest of the body, from the skin or the brain or whatever, to tell them when they should be cranking up activity and doing stuff and when they should switch to repair mode. Because basically what a cell has to do every day is it's active during the day, it's making stuff, or it's being a muscle cell or it's an immune cell or whatever. But then that activity just causes damage and wear and tear. If you think of a machine, right, stuff happens. Stuff breaks, stuff gets corroded, and it has to get fixed. And they all have their own repair systems that will fix up that stuff, but they have to go into rest mode in order to make all those repairs. That's normally what happens at night. Your brain sends these sleep signals to the rest of the body, and the cells stop making stuff, stop burning energy, and start just fixing themselves. But they need to sync that system. They don't want food coming down the pike if they're in fix yourself mode. So it all has to be coordinated. And so basically those light signals are the main way that the body coordinates all that activity. That's why you're starting to see a lot of recommendations to get that morning light in your eyes. Go outside for 15 minutes and make sure you get that bright morning light in your eyes. That's because that sort of helps get everybody being all your cells on the same time. They're like, okay, day has started, here we go. And then they'll also get sleepy at the same time.
They can work in coordination with each other.
Yeah.
That's remarkable. You say in your description that scientists estimate that reducing sun exposure enough to prevent one death from skin cancer can lead to 50 unnecessary deaths from other more dangerous diseases.
Right. That's the thing that a lot of scientists have been talking about lately is, yes, sun exposure does raise your risk of skin cancer, but there aren't very many deaths from skin cancer. Sun exposure also lowers your risk of death from all the cardiovascular diseases and a lot of other cancers and autoimmune diseases. And also it lowers your risk of dementia, depression, that stuff. So there's a trade-off, basically, where if you really stay out of the sun, you really get almost no sun exposure. Yes, you'll lower your risk of skin cancer a little bit, but you'll raise your risk of these much more common diseases that are the big killers. So it seems like a bad trade-off. You don't need to get a ton of sun. You just need to get a little bit every day to make sure you basically keep the rest of your body happy.
It's time to share another one of Salinity's favorite nonprofits. The Orca Network is based on Whidbey Island and is dedicated to raising awareness about the whales of the Pacific Northwest and the importance of providing them with healthy and safe habitats. They help ensure these magnificent animals have a future in our waters with community-powered whale sighting and stranded marine mammal networks and education and advocacy with their super fun whale center in downtown Langley. Consider donating directly or volunteering with the Orca Network. Learn more at orcanetwork.com. Let's talk about chocolate. That's highlight of my day. I already had some chocolate today. I'm going to go eat some more of it.
You sent me some nice chocolate too. That Taiwan chocolate was excellent.
Yes. So yeah, I started the business wanting to talk about Olympia oysters. Quickly learned not a lot of people are going to want to talk about Olympia oysters if that's the only thing I'm talking about. So added salmon, added seaweed, and then I found a chocolate that had seaweed in it, made by Chugach Chocolates up in Alaska. And that was kind of my slippery slope into feeding my obsession with chocolate. So now the store is mostly everything made in the Northwest, and then some really high-end fair trade chocolate made in the country of origin. I love your podcast, Wild Chocolate, that you then turned into a book. And because of that, we do carry 3 bars made from wild chocolate. Tell us, what is wild chocolate? Why is that important?
Cacao is native to the Amazon. And the way you make chocolate is you take the seeds of the cacao tree, which grow in these pods, and you ferment them and dry them and grind them up, and that's chocolate. It's just like you would do with almonds or any other type of nut, you can grind into a paste. But cacao has these unique qualities. It's really high in fat, a really nice fat called cocoa butter. And it has all these rich aromatic qualities that especially come out when you ferment it. So when you grind it up, instead of just turning into peanut butter or almond butter, it becomes this amazing thing called chocolate. And people have loved that for thousands of years. The people who really first perfected the art of taking those seeds and fermenting them and roasting them and turning them into chocolate were the Maya in Mesoamerica, some of their forerunners. Then when Europeans hit the New World in the 1500s and discovered chocolate, thanks to the Maya and the Aztec, they got all excited about it, but they assumed that it came from those places because the Maya and Aztec had been working with it for probably 4,000 years. The Maya had anyway. And they'd been farming it for many thousands of years as well. They had these huge orchards of cacao trees, of the whole thing already by the 1500s. No one thought about it as a wild food because it was all coming from these orchards. But it turned out that the cacao tree was actually native to the Amazon and still grew wild throughout the Amazon. And no one in the chocolate industry had ever paid attention to that. These original strains of chocolate, before they had developed strains to be farmed, were still poking around in the Amazon. And that suddenly started to matter about 20 years ago. And it was because, once again, we're back to the topic of industrial agriculture. As chocolate became a huge global phenomenon and they needed more and more of it, they started growing it all over the world in the tropics, which is the only place it can grow, wiping out rainforest and planting vast plantations of cacao trees. The trees they decided to plant were not the most delicious because industrial agriculture doesn't really care about deliciousness. It just cares about yield. They picked the trees that produced the most yield, that were the most disease resistant, basically the ones that could make a bunch of crop. They didn't taste that good. So that boring chocolate, or that boring cacao, is responsible for all the chocolate that we all grew up with, pretty much. Any regular cheap chocolate in the grocery store is made from this really underwhelming cacao. That's fine if you just have a little thin coating of chocolate on something, or if you've got so much sugar in your chocolate that the flavor of the chocolate doesn't really come through that much. But by the 1990s, 2000s, people were starting to make much more serious chocolate with much higher percentages of cacao in the chocolate. So 60%, 70%, 80%. And when you got that much cocoa, you can really detect the flavor of the cocoa. There's nowhere to hide it. Suddenly, the companies that were making these much more intense chocolates were like, we need better cacao. They started looking for better cacao, but these delicious varieties from the Americas with all these aromatics had been forgotten about, and a lot of them had disappeared. So there's a sort of like desperate hunt to find the good stuff and make more of it if they could. The best stuff that got found was this wild stuff in the Amazon. And first, a couple people reported out, and they're like, hey, there's actually some really delicious cacao in the Amazon. It's wild. And no one in the industry had ever heard of any of that. So they're like, no, there's no such thing as wild cacao. It's like saying wild tomatoes. It's been domesticated for thousands of years. And the other people were like, there's a lot of trees out here and they don't look domesticated and the beans are really good. Finally, everyone realized that there was some really high quality cacao throughout the Amazon. And if you could get your hands on it and have enough people to help you pick it, you could make some incredible chocolate that had different flavors than had ever been presented in a chocolate bar. That became a big movement in the past, 10, 15 years. And it's really fun and it's a good thing for the Amazon because if you can make a product from the wild trees, then you don't have to cut down the Amazon and turn it into a pasture for cattle, which is what happens in a lot of the Amazon. It's both a way to make a really delicious product, a way to give the people who live in those places some sort of income, and a way to preserve rainforests at the same time. So it's a win-win-win.
And in the podcast, you're literally going into the Amazon with your recorder, and some of the clips from there are crazy. You're met with machine guns when you touch down on the plane. You're hoping that the river doesn't flood your campsite.
Yeah, the Amazon is a rough area. There's not a whole lot of law enforcement. It's just like the Wild West. And it's also where a lot of drug running happens because the coca for the cocaine is all being grown in the Andes, like on the edge of the Amazon. And then it basically all gets transported through the Amazon on its way to the markets of the world. It's a dangerous area. And in addition, of course, the conditions are a little dangerous and a lot miserable. It's always flooding. There's tons of rain. It's always wet and muddy. There's tons and tons of biting insects. And then there's like the crocodiles and the jaguars. It's not a comfortable place to operate, but it's this super intense place. So it's really fascinating. If you can put up with the misery, there's a lot to experience there. I'm always good with that trade-off. So I convinced these chocolate seekers, these cacao hunters, to let me tag along and spend some time with them going upriver into the jungle to try to get these really delicious cacaos and turn them into chocolate. It's a crazy way to make a living For anyone, if you've ever had a business where you need to really tightly control conditions in order to have any hope of profitability, that all goes out the window in the Amazon. It's impossible to control any of it. You're totally dependent on other people out there to harvest the crop, because it's not like an orchard with apples where you just go row by row and pick your crop. It's just growing randomly through the rainforest. So you have to cover a lot of ground, and it's just not efficient in any way. And then you have to hope like you don't lose your crop overboard, or it doesn't rot on the way to the fermentation and drying station. The only people who are trying to do it are crazy people who are just like dreamers, who really have like been captured by this dream of making this beautiful wild food. And it's a beautiful dream. So it's really fun to write about them. And their chocolate is delicious. I wouldn't want to be trying to make my living doing it.
Louisa Abram is the company that I sell the chocolate from, that you've done some of this adventuring with. They are working with the people who are harvesting. There's a lot of education, and then the actual resources for that fermentation and drying phase. I know that's crucial, and resources that are pretty difficult to come by when you're just living out in rural areas like that.
Yeah, for sure. And she partners with an NGO called SOS Amazonia, whose goal is to work with all these indigenous groups that live in the Amazon and find ways to bring in some sort of economy that sustains the place, sustains the nature of the place at the same time. They're always looking for what they could make from the forest that is sustainable and can be some sort of income for them. Cacao is turning out to be one of the best things. They would go to some remote spot where they knew there was some really good cacao and just meet with the locals who live up and down the river and ask them if they were interested. And then if they were interested, then go into all the steps that would be necessary, because it really depends on them to harvest the stuff. And then you have to build a little wooden fermentation station where once you take the beans out of the pods, you need to ferment them in wooden boxes, stir them. There's a lot of work involved. And then after about a week of fermentation and stirring, then you dry them. And then they're shelf stable, and Louisa can send a boat up to pick them up and take them out of there. But she ends up, doing a lot of training workshops throughout the Amazon. And basically, she always has to depend on her relationship with the people there. And the reason it's worked for her where it hasn't worked for some other people who were kind of more just thinking about it as a business is that if it's just about numbers, about dollars, it tends to break down. The people lose interest once it's fishing season or whatever, as they should. For her, it's become much more relationship based than just pure business based. They have this very nice ongoing reciprocal flow that goes back and forth. And that has turned out to be a more stable way to do it.
That's just such amazing work. Really appreciate it. I did send you a few bars that we sell at the store from Fuwan in Taiwan. I got interested in this company because they do a chocolate bar that is an extra long fermentation time. The fermentation time is where a lot can go wrong. Just like you're fermenting beer, you can end up with really funky things during that process. And when we do chocolate workshops, we'll do 8 to 16 different chocolates, and you get to taste chocolate from all over and really start to identify flavor differences from different regions, the terroir of the chocolate. And with these 3 bars from Fuwan, you can try 100%, which a lot of people are scared of, but once they're actually trying high quality chocolate, they can appreciate it a little bit better. And then a 70%, and then that 70% with the double fermentation.
Right.
And
also the double fermentation, they were grinding it more coarsely.
Yes.
Which is more similar to what you might find in Mexico.
Yeah, I'm really hoping that we'll see more experimenting with that fermentation, because it tastes like there's fruit added to it, but it's that champagne-like flavors being added through fermentation.
The double ferment, super fruity, super high acid. It's a very different experience if people are used to traditional chocolate. And it makes you realize that there is no one thing that's chocolate. Chocolate can be all these different things. I feel like that's starting to get explored, but there's probably quite a bit of area still there.
I know at the Northwest Chocolate Festival here in Washington, there's a vendor who's doing different roast levels, and that's his whole thing. He's got a bunch of different beans from different places, and then he'll say, do you want that light roast, medium roast, or dark roast? Just like with coffee. They're very similar processes.
Yeah.
We're in a chocolate boom right now, but we're also facing some not great futures with chocolate. What does the future of chocolate look like from where you're standing?
It keeps changing. It's an interesting story. Chocolate has grown around the world, as we said. About 70% of it comes from Africa. Most of it is sold on the commodity market. So there's a set price that the world pays per ton of cacao. And that price had traditionally been low, and the farmers always kind of got screwed by the bigger companies. Then the farmers had a couple of bad years in a row where weather was bad and that reduced the crop, and some diseases got introduced and that reduced the crop. There's probably 3 years in a row where there was big shortages and there was more demand than supply. And so classically, prices rose. People were like paying whatever they could to just get their hands on the chocolate they needed. And prices went bonkers because of that. From $2,000 a ton, suddenly it was $7,000 a ton, and then $12,000 a ton. 6 times the traditional price. And so the Hershey's of the world were totally freaking out, and they announced that they were going to be using less chocolate in their products. And then other people announced that they were going to start to use fake chocolate, like where they were making chocolate flavors out of stuff that wasn't actually cacao. Insanity. Now it looks like this year it's going to be a really good crop, and so things are looking good. Suddenly the price went back down, and it's not down to 2,000, but it's much lower than it has been. Now everybody's, oh, maybe it's okay. And Hershey's, oh, we'll start using the same amount of chocolate we always use. We don't know why we said that. Everyone's like, all right, things are back to normal now. But it was a wake-up call in that this is a crop that's super important worldwide, and that is on the backs of 5 million small-scale farmers who are totally susceptible to changes in weather or disease. The crop is quite fragile in a sense. One of the takeaways is that they need more support. These companies need to be paying these farmers more for their cocoa so that the farmers can afford to do the things that they need to restore the long-term viability of their farms. If you're a farmer and you're getting undercut, you start taking shortcuts, you don't do the maintenance you need to do, you don't prune the trees as well, and then it eventually catches up with you, and then it catches up with everybody else. So the companies need to invest a lot more money on these farmers.
Definitely. And in your podcast, in episode 4, Big Bad Chocolate, you go through the chocolate section in a Whole Foods, and you talk about these brands that seem pretty good, say they're pretty great and sustainable, but a lot of it is just greenwashing.
Right. It doesn't take much for a cocoa company to say that they're doing the right things. Even fair trade. A lot of people know to look for like the fair trade logo on a product like chocolate. Fair trade, all that means is that, in theory, the farmers have a set price that is higher than the normal set price, but it's still not a very high price at all. It's negotiated over years. So it's like they get a tiny bit more, but then a tiny bit of that more actually goes to the fair trade corporation to pay their costs. And God knows what their executives are making. So most of the people in the chocolate industry told me fair trade is not a good system and don't count on that. Instead, look for chocolates that are made with a direct trade with a particular farm where they have a relationship with the farm, just like we were talking about with Louisa, where they're guaranteeing that farm more money. They're not buying on the commodity market. Basically, commodity markets always kill any hope of doing good for anybody. You want to cut out of the commodity system and establish a direct relationship with your farmer, because not only then is more of your money going to them, but you're also going to be more like responsive to their needs, and they're going to be more responsive to your needs. You might be like, hey, I love those beans you sent me last time. Did you do something different? And can you do that again? It's just a better relationship all around. And you're seeing this in more and more chocolate companies where they'll say right on the bar, like what farm those beans came from and who the people are. If the name of the farmer is on the package, that's a good sign. I think that's hopefully where more of the specialty market will be heading. The stuff that you sell.
Yes, exactly. I want to wrap this up, but I have 2 questions, one small, one big. First, would you say, or can I get your endorsement of an Olympia oyster over an East Coast oyster?
Apples and oranges. Olympia has the most intense flavor and it's this incredible little creature. So the Olympia is just amazing. It's also very small, so it's too small for some people. Eastern oyster is bigger and it has a very crisp potato chip kind of a flavor. So people love it with beer, right? It's the perfect oyster with beer. The Olympia is a more intense flavor experience for sure.
It's more like the caviar of oysters.
It's the caviar of oysters.
And caviar and potato chips is one of my favorite treats. So.
Right. So what you really want to do is you want to put a little Olympia oyster on top and eat them together.
I've never seen that before.
I haven't either. I haven't even thought about it just now. So let's make that happen.
Great. Yeah.
That's a good Instagram. It could be a thing, actually. Is that a thing?
I love that.
All right, let's do that. Next time I'm out there, let's do that.
Definitely. Okay, and then last question. For somebody wanting to get into food and science writing, over all of your years of writing and specifically interviewing people, you've interacted with so many different people for all of these stories. What kind of advice would you have?
Yeah, so pick your character, pick a good character, pick somebody who likes to talk. Seriously, don't pick the quiet, demure one. Pick a character who likes to talk and who has a big personality. So they'll give you lots to write about. And they have to have agreed that they're going to take take you along with them. Record like crazy. It's so easy now to record and just get instant transcriptions of everything. So that way you never miss anything. Like you think you're going to remember in your head, but you never get it in exactly the right words. And it's the weird words that people put together that make what they say interesting a lot of the time. So yeah, record everything, pick your subject well, and also know what you're getting into because it is a tough world. The world of journalism is transforming fast as magazines go under and books are a little shaky. People's attention spans are going down. There's always going to be storytelling, but I think the traditional storytelling is going to suffer. So what are going to be the new venues in media through which people tell stories? I don't think it's going to be the traditional ones necessarily. Podcasts are a really interesting one. It's hard to monetize a podcast these days, but I think a lot of people listen to them, and that can be a fun way to tell a story.
I know I'm much more of a visual than auditory person. Why this podcast is going to have a transcript, all of our episodes, because while I like listening while I'm doing other things, I love just speed reading through something even better than listening.
Yeah, me too.
Hopefully we'll still keep some written words.
Hope so. See, it depends how much of the work AI is doing for us.
Yeah. Do you know what your next book is going to be?
No, I'm working on that right now. It might be further down the energy path. What we were talking about, basically light coming through the whole system.
Cool. Fascinating. Well, I look forward to checking in a year or two and hearing more about it.
Yeah, I'll keep you posted. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for joining me. Have a good day, Rowan.
You too.
Tune in next week and every week after for more conversations with friends of Salinity, Seafood, and more. If you'd like to get your hands on Rowan's books or support other small businesses from the Pacific Northwest, head over to eatsalinity.com. That's EATSALINITY. You can also shop in person if you're here on Whidbey Island. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review, subscribe, and tell all your friends. This podcast is hosted by me, Emily Wilder, CEO of Salinity Seafood and More. It's edited by Luc Hagopian and exists entirely to eventually bring everyone to the topic of our native Olympia oyster species. Please help increase demand and appreciation for this beautiful oyster by asking for it everywhere you find oysters.
Our love is like